The sweet tea was ice cold. It soaked through my new linen dress, sticking to my skin like shame. But colder still was the sound of my family's laughter and the defiant smirk on my 7-year-old granddaughter's face. In that single moment, I knew the love I had given had been turned into a weapon against me. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Share your city below. Let's begin this journey together. The heat in my son's backyard was a physical weight, pressing down on the fake cheer and the smell of overpriced charcoal. It was Mary's birthday, another performance of the perfect suburban life, and I was a prop. I sat on a flimsy plastic chair, nursing a glass of water, watching the pageant. Mike, my son, was holding court by his monstrous stainless steel grill, laughing too loudly with men whose hands had never touched anything rougher than a golf club. My daughter-in-law, Mary, drifted across the lawn in a white sundress, a smiling shark navigating friendly waters. Every manicured blade of grass, every perfectly placed flower pot screamed of money. My money. They called it success. I knew it was debt. A debt they had transferred to my name year by year, piece by piece. I saw my granddaughter, Jessica, break away from the other children. She was 7, but her eyes were older. They were her mother's eyes, cold, assessing. She was holding a large, sweating cup of sweet tea. She walked toward me with a strange deliberation, not the clumsy, stumbling gait of a child, but the steady pace of someone with a mission. The conversations around me faded into a dull hum. I saw only her, a small assassin in a pink dress, her target locked. She didn't trip. She didn't pretend to stumble. She stopped directly in front of my chair, looked me dead in the eye, and tilted the cup. The liquid was a shock of ice and sugar against the summer heat. It cascaded down the front of my cream linen dress, the one I'd bought specifically for this event, a foolish attempt to blend in. The cold soaked through to my skin, but a different kind of ice was spreading through my veins. Silence fell for a beat, a collective intake of breath. Then I saw it on Jessica's face. Not a flicker of remorse, not the panicked look of a child who'd made a mistake. There was a smirk. Small, practiced, triumphant. She looked at me, then glanced over her shoulder at her mother, seeking approval. She got it. Mary's face was a mask of theatrical dismay, but her eyes were alight with victory. Then came the laughter. It started with one of Mary's friends, a sharp titter, and then it spread like a virus. Mike turned from the grill, spatula in hand. "Looks like Mom needed to cool off," he boomed, playing to his audience. The men around him roared. It was a good line, the perfect line to dismiss the act, to frame it as a harmless prank, to paint me as the stuffy old woman who couldn't take a joke. I was the joke. My public humiliation was the afternoon's entertainment. I slowly, deliberately placed my glass of water on the small table beside me. I stood up, the sticky tea dripping from the hem of my dress onto the pristine, professionally maintained lawn. The laughter faltered as they saw my face. It was blank, devoid of the emotion they expected, the tears they craved. I didn't say a word to Jessica. I didn't look at Mike or Mary. I simply turned and walked toward the house. I could feel their eyes on my back, their confusion palpable, an actor going off script. I went into their guest bathroom, a sterile beige box with fluffy towels that were never meant to be used. I looked at my reflection in the ornate mirror above the sink. My face was a stranger's, calm, unreadable. Outside, I heard the party resume. The volume turned up a notch to cover the awkwardness. They had already moved on, but I hadn't. In the cold silence of that bathroom, a decade of resentment crystallized into a single, hard thought. This was not an accident. This was a message. They saw me as weak, pathetic, an endless resource to be drained and discarded. They thought I would absorb this, just like I'd absorbed every other slight, every other demand, every other betrayal. They were wrong. This wasn't an ending. It was a declaration of war, and they had no idea of the enemy they had just created. The drive home in my rattling 10-year-old Ford was a journey through a graveyard of memories. But I wasn't mourning. I was collecting ammunition. Every street, every landmark triggered another file in the case I was building in my head. Exhibit A, Thanksgiving. I'd spend 2 days baking my pecan pie from scratch, the crust made with lard and ice water, just as my mother had taught me. It was the one piece of my heritage I had left to give. I'd walk into their house, holding the pie like a sacred offering. Mary would take it with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, Nicole, you shouldn't have," she'd say, and she meant it. She'd place it at the far end of the dessert buffet, an afterthought while she directed everyone toward the ridiculously expensive cakes she'd ordered from a French bakery downtown. One year, I saw her scrape my pie into the trash at the end of the night, untouched. She thought I hadn't seen. I see everything. Exhibit B, Christmas. I lived on a fixed income, a teacher's pension. But every year, I'd start in July, putting money aside for their gifts. I listened, I paid attention. One year, it cost me over $600. The American Girl doll for Jessica, with the miniature horse she'd circled in the catalog, the spa package for Mary, the $250 DeWalt power tool set for Mike because he'd complained for months about his old drill. I watched them open their presents. Jessica played with the doll for 5 minutes before getting bored. Mary tucked the gift certificate in her purse without a real thank you. And Mike. Mike opened the tool set, gave a cursory, "Oh, cool," and then spent the rest of the morning fawning over a cashmere sweater Mary had given him. He tossed the tools I'd carefully chosen into a corner. My gift from them that year? A cheap, plush bathrobe from Walmart and a set of vanilla-scented candles. The price tag was still on the bottom of the bathrobes box, $9.99. It wasn't an oversight. It was a calculation, a clear statement of my worth to them. Exhibit C, my invisibility, Jessica's soccer games. My role was team photographer. "Mom, get one of us by the goal," Mike would yell, tossing me his latest iPhone. I have hundreds of pictures of them, the perfect smiling family, Mike with his arm around Mary, Jessica holding a trophy. There's not a single photograph from those years that includes my face. I was the functionary, the unpaid assistant, documenting a life from which I was completely excluded. The family dinners were worse. The conversation was a relentless monologue about their country club, their planned trip to Aruba, the latest gossip from the PTA. They never once asked about my life, my friends, my book club. It was as if my existence began and ended with their needs. When I tried to tell a story about a former student, Mary would interrupt with a sigh, "Oh, Nicole, that's nice," before immediately changing the subject to the estimate for their new landscaping. My life was boring. My experiences were irrelevant. I was not a person. I was a utility. I had allowed it. I had enabled it. I had mistaken their dependence for love. I had played the part of the meek, supportive mother because I was terrified of the alternative. The loneliness, the whispers at church about the family falling apart. The terror was a cage I had built for myself. But the humiliation at the barbecue wasn't a bar in the cage. It was the key, and as I pulled into my own driveway, I knew I was finally ready to use it. The financial drain started with a lie, wrapped in the grief of my husband's death. The $5,000 from his life insurance policy was meant to be my emergency fund, a thin wall between me and disaster. Mike came to me a month after the funeral, his face a perfect blend of sorrow and ambition. "Mom, it's a tough time to ask, I know," he began, his voice low and sincere, "but I have an opportunity to get my contracting business off the ground. I just need a small injection of capital, a loan. I'll pay you back with interest, I swear." It was a masterful performance. He knew I was vulnerable. He knew I wanted to believe in him, to see a piece of my husband's legacy in his success. I wrote the check. The words loan and interest were never spoken again. The money vanished into the black hole of his ambition. That was how it began, not with a demand, but with a gentle, loving theft. The next theft was bigger. a heist that took years to unfold. They found a house in Maple Creek, a new subdivision where the homes were too big, too close together, and all painted in the same 3 shades of beige. It was a temple to suburban status, and Mary had to have it. Of course, they couldn't afford it. Their spending habits were a bonfire of cash, and their credit was a wasteland. So they came to me. Not for money this time, for my name. My 72 years of perfect credit. My reputation as a stable, reliable citizen. "It's just a formality, Mom," Mike had said, spreading the mortgage application on my kitchen table. "The bank just needs a co-signer to feel secure. Our income is about to skyrocket. You'll never have to worry about a thing." I remember the weight of the pen in my hand in that cold bank office. I remember the slick, insincere smile of the loan officer. I signed my name on a $280,000 debt. I was chaining myself to them, a willing captive. For a year, the illusion held. Then the polite calls from the bank started. A missed payment, then another. Mike always had an excuse. A client was late paying an invoice. There was an unexpected expense for materials. The lies were smooth, practiced. Then the certified letter arrived, a stark legal document that screamed the word default. They were 90 days past due, $9,000. The bank informed me that if the arrears weren't paid within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. And my name, my credit, my own small house, it would all be dragged down with them. The panic was a physical thing, a cold hand squeezing my chest. I went to my bank. I stood before a 20-year-old teller and signed the withdrawal slip that would gut the savings David and I had spent our lives building. I didn't tell her what it was for. The shame was too great. I took the cashier's check to their bank and paid their debt. I fixed their problem, and in doing so, I taught them the most dangerous lesson of all, that I would always be there to clean up their mess. I had become the safety net, and they were about to find out what happens when you cut the rope. My compliance became their expectation. My savings became their second income. I took a job as a substitute teacher, standing in front of classrooms of indifferent teenagers, just to have enough cash flow to plug the leaks in their lifestyle. The requests for money became casual, frequent, and shameless. "Mom, can you spot me $1,000? The property taxes are due." "Mary needs $500 for the PTA fundraiser. It's important for her image, for my business." It was never a loan anymore. It was an entitlement. I paid $4,000 for the stone patio and outdoor kitchen where I was treated like a leper. I paid $3,000 for a Disney cruise because, as Mary explained, it would be traumatic for Jessica to be the only one of her friends who hasn't been on a cruise. I was funding the very life that was being used to exclude and humiliate me. The morning after the party, I woke before dawn. The house was silent. There was no anger, no grief, just the cold, clear focus of a sniper. I went to the hall closet and pulled out a heavy cardboard box labeled Finances. Inside, meticulously organized in manila folders, was a decade of their greed. Every canceled check, every bank statement showing a transfer, every credit card bill I had paid for them. It was a paper trail leading directly to this day. I spread the documents across my kitchen table. It looked like a crime scene. And I was finally ready to call the detectives. My first call was to Arthur Finch. He was my husband's lawyer, a semi-retired pit bull who lived for a good fight. His voice was gravelly on the other end of the line. "Arthur, it's Nicole Vance. I need to retain your services." There was a pause. "What's the trouble, Nicole?" "My son," I said. "He's made some bad investments. I need to protect my assets." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie Arthur understood. Business, not messy family drama. We set a meeting for the next day. My second call was to the mortgage company. I navigated the automated phone tree with robotic precision. When I finally got a human being on the line, my voice was calm and firm. "My name is Nicole Vance. I am a co-signer on loan number 7B4889231. I need the full documentation for removing myself from the loan." The agent was polite, professional. She explained the process, refinancing. They would have to reapply for the loan under their own names, based on their own income and credit. It was a death sentence, and she didn't even know it. I spent the next 2 hours at my scanner, creating a digital copy of every single piece of evidence. I attached it all to an email to Arthur. The subject line was simple: Vance versus Vance. Hitting the send button felt like launching a missile. I knew the impact would be devastating. I knew it would shatter their world. I went to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the table, watching the sun come up. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound, exhilarating sense of control. For the first time in 10 years, I was the one holding the weapon. The missile took 3 weeks to hit its target. The counterstrike came in the form of a phone call. I saw Mike's name on the caller ID and let it ring, a small, deliberate act of power. On the 4th ring, I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice neutral. "What the hell did you do?" he screamed. There was no preamble, just raw, cornered fury. The sound was ragged, panicked. This wasn't the confident, charming son everyone else saw. This was the real him, a terrified bully who had just lost his leverage. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Michael," I said calmly. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. "The bank! I got a registered letter from the goddamn bank. They're saying we have to re-qualify for our mortgage. They're saying you filed papers to have your name removed. You're trying to ruin me." I let him rant. The silence on my end was more powerful than any argument. It forced him to confront the fact that his usual tactics, bluster and intimidation, were having no effect. "You are going to call that bank," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You are going to tell them this was a mistake, a clerical error. You are going to fix it. Today." I said nothing. "Did you hear me?" he shouted. "Yes," I said. "I heard you." Then I hung up. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with the opening salvo from Mary. Her texts were a flurry of rage and calculated cruelty. "I knew you were a bitter, selfish old woman. I always told Mike, you are trying to make your own granddaughter homeless. Is that what you want? I will tell everyone what you are doing. Everyone at church, everyone in the PTA. You will be a pariah. This is about that stupid dress, isn't it? You would destroy a family over a piece of clothing." I read each message with a kind of detached clinical interest, then blocked her number. Her venom couldn't reach me anymore. Their next move was predictable. They sent in the church. Pastor Serge called that evening, his voice oozing with a gentle, misguided concern. "Nicole, my dear, I've just had a very distressing conversation with Mike and Mary," he began. "They seem to think there's been a terrible misunderstanding." He talked about the sanctity of family, the virtue of forgiveness, the importance of turning the other cheek. He was a good man being used as a tool by bad people. "Pastor," I interrupted, my voice polite but firm, "this is not a misunderstanding. This is a business matter. It involves contracts and large sums of money. It is being handled by my attorney." The word attorney was a splash of cold water. It shifted the ground from his comfortable territory of faith and forgiveness to the alien landscape of the law. He stammered, confused. "An attorney? But this is family." "Sometimes," I said, "that's when you need an attorney the most." Their final, most disgusting tactic came that weekend. My doorbell rang. It was Jessica, dressed in her Sunday best, clutching a handmade card. Her expression was wooden, her eyes focused on a point just past my shoulder. I could see Mary's SUV parked half a block away, idling. My granddaughter was a human shield, a prop in their desperate play for sympathy. She held out the card. I took it. A crudely drawn house with a large X through it. Inside, in wobbly letters, it said, "Grandma, please don't take my home. I love you." It was emotional blackmail, coached and rehearsed. I looked down at the child, a victim in her own right, and felt a flicker of something. Not pity, but a cold resolve. They would even sacrifice their own daughter's innocence to win. "Thank you, Jessica," I said quietly. I took the card, closed the door, and walked directly to the kitchen, where I fed the card into my paper shredder. The war had just begun. The attacks became personal. They were designed to isolate me, to make me feel vulnerable. I came out of the supermarket one afternoon to find a deep, ugly scratch gouged into the driver's side door of my Ford. The metal was curled back like a wound, and carved into the paint was a single word: selfish. I ran my fingers over it. There was no doubt who had done it. It was a signature. I didn't call the police. What could they do? It was my word against his. This was a private war. The next week, garbage started appearing on my lawn overnight. Stinking fast food bags, empty beer bottles. It was a petty, juvenile act of aggression, meant to wear me down, to signal that they could get to me whenever they wanted. Then came the mail. Anonymous notes, clipped letters from magazines pasted onto cheap paper, just like in the movies. Witch, money-grubbing hag, liar. I burned them in my kitchen sink, watching the hateful words turn to ash. I knew they would escalate. Fear began to creep in, a cold companion in my quiet house. I started checking the locks 3-4 times a night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. This was what they wanted. They wanted me terrified. The physical confrontation came on a Thursday night. I volunteered at the public library, shelving books. It was my one remaining connection to my old life, a quiet refuge. But they invaded it. As I walked to my car in the dimly lit parking lot, Mike's truck pulled up, blocking me in. He wasn't alone. He had 2 of his construction crew with him. They got out, big men who reeked of stale beer and sweat. They didn't speak. They just stood there, forming a wall between me and my car. "Mom," Mike said, his voice deceptively calm, "this has gone on long enough. You're embarrassing the family. You're going to stop this. Now." His friends took a step closer. The implied violence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I thought about screaming, but the parking lot was empty. It was just me and them. I gripped my keys in my fist, the sharp edges digging into my palm. I could feel the tremor in my hands, but I forced my voice to be steady. I looked past the 2 goons and stared directly at my son. "You brought them here to scare me, Michael," I said, my voice low and full of contempt. "You think this is going to work?" One of his friends chuckled. "Your son's just trying to talk some sense into you," he sneered. "You should listen to him." I ignored him. My focus was entirely on Mike. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not conviction, but weakness. The weakness of a bully who needed backup. "Move your truck," I said. It was not a request. He hesitated, looking to his friends for support. In that moment of hesitation, I knew I had won the exchange. He was posturing. I was not. "Now," I said again, my voice like a whip crack. He stared at me for a long, tense moment, then gave a curt nod to his driver. The truck backed up. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors without looking back. I drove home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the adrenaline leaving a sick, shaky feeling in its wake. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The final message was delivered the next morning. All 4 of my tires had been slashed, the rubber gaping open in obscene wounds. Tucked under my windshield wiper was a note, written in the same block letters as the word on my car door. "This is your last chance." It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a promise. And it filled me not with fear, but with a righteous, liberating fury. They had just given me all the justification I would ever need. The day after my tires were slashed, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another tactic, another threat. But something made me answer. "Am I speaking with Nicole Vance?" a woman's voice asked. It was quiet, hesitant. "Who is this?" I asked, my tone sharp. "My name is Brenda Jones. I used to be the bookkeeper at Henderson Construction. I worked with your son." A switch flipped in my memory. Mike had mentioned her once, years ago. Old Brenda, he'd called her, laughing. A real bean counter. Thinks every paperclip is coming out of her own pocket. "What do you want?" I said. "I think I might have something you need," she said, her voice dropping lower. "I heard through the grapevine what's happening. With the house, with everything. People talk. I think I know why he's so desperate for your money. Can we meet? Somewhere public." We met in a noisy, crowded Panera Bread the next afternoon. Brenda was a plain-looking woman in her 50s, her face etched with a permanent expression of worry. She clutched her coffee cup like a life raft. She had the air of someone who had been invisible her whole life. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, not looking me in the eye. "I shouldn't be doing this. I could get in a lot of trouble." She pushed a thick manila envelope across the table. It made a solid, satisfying thud. Mike told everyone he was laid off from Henderson's because the market was slow. That was a lie. He was fired for embezzlement. I opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of pages, photocopies of corporate credit card statements, receipts from Home Depot and Lowe's, internal memos. "For almost a year," Brenda said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "he was using the company card to buy materials for his own side jobs. High-end lumber, expensive appliances, custom windows. He'd charge them to a Henderson job site, but the materials would disappear. He was running his own business on Mr. Henderson's dime." She pointed to a highlighted line on a statement. "See? A $2,000 Viking range. Mr. Henderson doesn't install Viking. Mike put that in a kitchen he was remodeling on the side and charged our company for it." The total, she had calculated, was just over $10,000. But that was only the beginning. "He cheated the customers too," she said, her eyes finally meeting mine, a spark of anger in them. "Especially the elderly ones. He'd find a small problem, a leaky pipe, and tell them they needed to replumb the whole house. He'd inflate his estimates, charge for phantom materials, bill for hours no one worked. He used to laugh about it in the office, called it his old person tax." The words were a punch to the gut. "And when anyone would question his bill," Brenda continued, her voice trembling with indignation, "he'd always say the same thing. He'd lean back in his chair and smile that charming smile of his and say, 'Don't worry, my sweet old mom thinks I'm a saint. She'll tell you I'm the most honest guy in the world.' I was his character reference, the foundation of his fraud. My good name was the tool he used to rob people, the entire edifice of his life, the big house, the fancy cars, the country club membership. It was all a lie, built on stolen money and my reputation. I sat there, the evidence in my hands, the truth a cold, hard weight in my stomach. The humiliation at the barbecue was nothing compared to this. This was a betrayal of my entire life, of everything I stood for. That night, Mike called. His voice was smug. He thought he had me scared. Mom had some time to think, ready to be reasonable. I let him finish. Then I said, my voice as cold and clear as glass, "I had a very interesting meeting today, Michael, with a woman named Brenda Jones." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of his entire world falling apart. Their final desperate act was to file a lawsuit. It was a Hail Mary pass, a pathetic attempt to reframe themselves as the victims. They sued me for infliction of emotional distress and financial endangerment of a minor. They claimed my actions were those of a vengeful, unstable woman, and they were seeking damages, enough to pay off the house, and then some. They were trying to get a court of law to finish the job they had started. Their lawyer was exactly the kind of man they would hire, slick, loud, with expensive shoes, and a cheap soul. In the courtroom, he was a performer, his voice rising and falling in theatrical waves. He spoke of the sacred, unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. He painted a picture of Mike and Mary as hard-working pillars of the community, trying only to provide a stable home for their daughter, a home their cruel, vindictive mother was trying to rip away from them out of sheer spite. Arthur Finch sat beside me, motionless, watching the performance with the bored expression of a man who has seen it all before. When it was his turn, he didn't approach the jury. He didn't raise his voice. He simply set up a large easel. On it was a professionally printed chart, a detailed, itemized list of every single dollar I had given them over the past 10 years. Each entry had a date, an amount, and a description. $5,000, initial business loan, unpaid. $9,000, mortgage, arrears payment. $4,000, patio construction. $3,000, Disney cruise. The list went on and on. At the bottom, in bold red letters, was the total $50,750. Arthur let the number hang in the silent courtroom for a full minute before he spoke. He called Brenda Jones to the stand. She was nervous, but her voice was steady. She walked the court through the documents from the envelope, explaining in simple, clear terms how Mike had systematically stolen from his employer. The other lawyer tried to trip her up on cross-examination, tried to paint her as a disgruntled employee. She didn't flinch. "I am a bookkeeper," she said simply. "Numbers don't lie, and these numbers show he is a thief." Arthur then called two of the elderly clients Mike had defrauded. They told their stories with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity. And then he called me. I walked to the stand. I did not look at my son. I looked at the judge, a stern-faced woman who had been watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. Arthur led me through my testimony. I didn't speak of my hurt feelings. I spoke of the facts, the money, the co-signed loan, the default notice, and then he asked me about the harassment. My voice was a monotone as I described the keyed car, the garbage on my lawn, the slashed tires. I told them about the confrontation in the library parking lot. I presented the threatening note. I laid out the campaign of terror they had waged against me piece by ugly piece. Their lawyer objected, calling it irrelevant. Arthur countered, "Your Honor, it goes directly to the heart of their claim for emotional distress. It shows who was distressing whom." The judge allowed it. When I was finished, the room was silent. The judge looked down from her bench, her eyes finally settling on Mike and Mary. The mask of indifference was gone, replaced by a look of utter contempt. "In my 15 years on this bench," she began, her voice ringing with cold authority, "I have never seen such a grotesque and shameless abuse of the legal system. You have not come to this court seeking justice. You have come here to perpetrate one final, desperate act of financial extortion against the woman who gave you life, and who, it seems, has given you everything else as well." She dismissed their lawsuit with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. She ordered them to pay my legal fees in full, and then she delivered the coup de grace. "Furthermore," she said, her voice like cracking ice, "based on the testimony regarding the campaign of harassment and intimidation, I am issuing a 1-year restraining order. You will not come within 500 feet of your mother or her property. You will not contact her by any means. Is that understood?" They sat there, stunned into silence. Their lawsuit hadn't just failed. It had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. I walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. The war was over. The restraining order was a wall, but the real freedom came from within. The day after the trial, I put my house on the market. It was a good house, full of memories, but they were tainted now. It was the house where I had waited for their calls, where I had written the checks, where I had allowed myself to shrink. Selling it was not a retreat. It was a liberation. I took the equity from the sale, combined it with what was left of my savings and the court-ordered payment from Mike, and I had a modest war chest. I could have lived comfortably, carefully, but I was done with being careful. I found a small, dusty storefront for rent in the old downtown district, a part of the city that was just beginning to show signs of life again. It had been empty for years, but it had high ceilings and a beautiful front window. I signed the lease. People thought I was crazy. A woman my age starting a new business. But I wasn't just starting a business. I was building a fortress. I called it the Reading Nook. I spent 3 months turning it into a sanctuary. I did much of the work myself, stripping the old floors, painting the walls a warm, sunny yellow. I hired a local carpenter to build floor-to-ceiling bookshelves out of dark, fragrant cedar. I filled the store with comfortable armchairs and good lighting. I wanted it to be a place where people felt safe, welcomed, and seen. The first and only person I hired was Brenda Jones. Her old boss had fired her after the trial, afraid of the drama. She was struggling. I offered her the manager's position. The look of relief and gratitude on her face was worth more than any profit I would ever make. We were a team of 2 women who had been discarded, and we were determined to build something that would last. News of Mike and Mary's implosion filtered back to me through the town's relentless gossip network. The bank foreclosed on the Maple Creek house. Their names were in the paper. They moved into a cramped, run-down apartment complex by the highway, the kind of place they used to speed past with disdain. Mike, his reputation as a contractor destroyed, ended up on a landscaping crew, doing back-breaking work for minimum wage. Mary, stripped of her social status, got a job as a cashier at Target, the bright red shirt a uniform of her defeat. I took no pleasure in their downfall, but I felt no pity either. Their new life was not a punishment I had inflicted. It was a consequence they had earned. My focus was on my own life, on the satisfying heft of a box of new books, the smell of fresh coffee brewing, the quiet murmur of customers browsing the shelves. I was building, creating, growing. They were locked in a prison of their own bitterness. I had the key to my own door, and I had no intention of ever looking back. A year into the life of the Reading Nook, the local newspaper ran a feature on new businesses. A young reporter interviewed me, and a photographer took my picture, a shot of me standing proudly amidst my bookshelves. The article was titled, "Retired Teacher Writes Her Own New Chapter." It told a sanitized version of my story, focusing on reinvention and community spirit. It didn't mention the lawsuit or the restraining order. It didn't have to. The people in town knew. A week after the article appeared, a letter arrived at the store. The envelope was cheap, the address written in a childish scrawl. There was no return address. I recognized the handwriting. It was from Jessica. I opened it with a strange sense of detachment. The note inside was on a torn piece of notebook paper. "Grandma, I saw your picture in the newspaper. Your store is pretty." Mom cried when she saw it. "She says we live in this bad apartment because of you. Dad is mad all the time. I'm sorry about the tea." Mom said it would be funny. It wasn't. I read the letter. The child's apology, tangled up in her parents' poison, was a pathetic, heartbreaking thing. They were still using her, this time as a conduit for their misery, a last-ditch attempt to land a blow. But the blow didn't land. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical sadness for the girl being raised in that toxic stew of resentment. She was a casualty in a war she didn't start. I folded the letter and put it in the locked cash box under the counter. I would not reply. There was no path back. Responding would be seen as an opening, an invitation for more manipulation. My silence was not cruelty. It was a necessary boundary. A locked door. A few months later, the Chamber of Commerce held its annual awards dinner. The Reading Nook won New Business of the Year. Brenda and I attended the dinner. I stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom, holding a small glass plaque. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, customers, other local business owners, friends from my book club. I gave a short, simple speech about the power of community and second chances. They applauded. They smiled. They saw me. Not as Mike's mother, not as a victim, not as an old woman. They saw me as Nicole Vance, owner of the Reading Nook, a woman who had built something from nothing. The validation I had spent a decade begging for from my son, I was now receiving freely from a room full of strangers. I realized then that my old family hadn't been a family at all. It was a cult of two, and I had been its only follower. My real family was right here, in this room, in this town, in the life I had built with my own two hands. Life found a new rhythm, one of my own making. The bookstore became my world. It was a world of quiet order, of shared stories, of simple, honest transactions. Brenda was the best partner I could have asked for, fiercely protective of the business and of me. We were two survivors who had found a safe harbor. My days were filled with the small, satisfying tasks of running a business, ordering new stock, planning author events, talking to customers about the books they loved. I was no longer waiting for the phone to ring with the next demand, the next crisis. My life was blessedly, wonderfully predictable. One afternoon, a young woman with a baby in a stroller came in. She browsed for a long time before bringing a stack of board books to the counter. As I was ringing her up, she looked at me with a shy smile. "You probably don't remember me. I'm Sarah Peterson. You were my 10th grade English teacher." I looked at her, and the memory clicked into place. A quiet, withdrawn girl who always sat in the back of the classroom. "I remember you, Sarah," I said. "You were a wonderful writer." Her eyes widened. "You remember that?" she asked, a genuine surprise in her voice. "You were the first person who ever told me I was good at something. You told me I had a strong voice. You encouraged me to keep a journal. I wanted you to know that it mattered. It really mattered." She paid for her books and left. I stood at the counter for a long time after she was gone, her words echoing in my ears. For all the years I had felt invisible and worthless in my own family, I had been seen by others. I had been making a difference. I had been a person of value. I had just been showing my value to the wrong people. My worth was never tied to my son's approval or my daughter-in-law's acceptance. It had been forged in classrooms and libraries, in the quiet acts of teaching and encouragement. It had been there all along. I had just been too blind, too desperate for their love to see it. That quiet moment in the bookstore was more healing than the judge's verdict, more validating than the business award. It was the final quiet click of a lock falling into place. I was whole. I didn't need anything from them ever again. The restraining order eventually expired. It made no difference. The silence from them was absolute. The town was small and whispers made their way to me. Their life continued its downward spiral. Mike injured his back doing landscape work and moved to a job stocking shelves on the night shift at a grocery distribution center. Mary took a second job cleaning offices after her shift at Target. They were trapped in a cycle of low-wage work and resentment. The bright future they felt entitled to now a bitter joke. They became a local cautionary tale, a story parents told their grown children about the consequences of greed and disrespect. I never spoke their names. When acquaintances asked about my son, I would offer a simple, conversation-ending statement. "We are not in touch." It was the truth. It was all that needed to be said. My life, in contrast, continued to expand. The Reading Nook became a beloved local institution. We hosted book drives for schools, started a literacy program for adults, and became the unofficial meeting place for a dozen different community groups. My world, which had shrunk to the size of my son's needs, was now vast and full of interesting, kind, respectful people. I was no longer just a mother or a grandmother. I was Nicole, a business owner, a friend, a vital part of my community. My story did not end as a tragedy. It ended as a triumph. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a better one, a real one. I learned that biology doesn't make a family. Love, respect, and loyalty make a family, and sometimes the most profound act of self-love is to amputate the parts of your life that are poisoning you. I chose to live, and I have never for one single moment regretted it. Every evening I lock the front door of my store. The solid click of the deadbolt is the sound of safety, of security, of a world I built and control. A world where I am the author, and I decide how the story ends.